The great throne hall of the Aurelian Empire stood in complete silence. Towers of black crystal rose toward the glowing ceiling, reflecting the cold light of distant stars. At the center of the hall, Queen Zalara sat upon her ancient throne, unmoving. Once, this chamber had echoed with celebration, strategy, and power. Now it felt like a tomb. The empire waited, but their ruler did not speak. She could not. Her daughter, Princess Lyra, was gone. Princess Lyra had been more than an heir. She was the future of the empire, a symbol of unity in a galaxy filled with endless conflict. Brilliant, curious, and fearless, she had chosen to lead a deep space exploration mission beyond known star routes. The mission was meant to secure new alliances and resources. Instead, it ended in disaster. Lyra's ship vanished without warning in a region of space even the Empire's advanced sensors could not read. Weeks of searching found nothing, no wreckage, no signal, no survivors. Finally, the Council declared her dead. Queen Zalara had rejected the announcement at first. She had ordered fleets sent into the void, scientists pushed beyond safety limits, and prophets consulted despite ancient laws. But space offered only silence. Over time, hope became pain, and pain hardened into grief. The queen wore mourning armor instead of ceremonial robes. The empire followed her example. Flags were lowered. Songs were silenced. The future they had believed in no longer existed. As the days passed, whispers spread across the empire. Some claimed the stars themselves had taken the princess. Others said the mission had been cursed from the start. None dared speak such things aloud in the queen's presence. Her grief was not loud or violent. It was far more dangerous, cold, controlled, and endless. She ruled with precision, but without mercy. Every decision carried the weight of loss. On this day, the council gathered once more. They stood in a wide circle below the throne, their faces tight with unease. The High Admiral stepped forward and lowered his head. He spoke carefully, as if words themselves could wound the queen. The search was officially ending. Resources were needed elsewhere. The empire faced growing threats at its borders. The past, he said, must be released. For a long moment, Queen Zalara said nothing. Then she rose from her throne. Her presence alone forced the council to step back. She did not shout. She did not argue. She simply declared that the empire would remember Princess Lyra as fallen, but never as forgotten. The search would end, but hope would not be spoken again. Hope, she had learned, was cruel. The council bowed and withdrew, leaving the queen alone. She moved to the great window behind the throne, gazing into the endless stars. Somewhere out there, her daughter had taken her final breath, or so the galaxy believed. The queen placed a clawed hand against the glass. For the first time since the announcement, her control faltered. Grief tightened around her heart, heavy and sharp. Far beyond the borders of the Aurelian Empire, in a region marked as forbidden, a single human vessel drifted through the darkness. It was small, outdated by galactic standards, and completely alone. Its engines were quiet, running on minimal power. Inside, a human pilot studied a damaged star map, his eyes fixed on a location most species refused to approach. He had not come for glory, reward, or permission. He had come to return what the galaxy had already buried. As the human ship crossed into Aurelian-controlled space, alarms ignited across the empire. Defense systems locked onto the unknown vessel. The identity scan returned a single word that stirred anger and confusion within the command centers: human. No message was sent. No warning was given. The ship continued forward, steady and unafraid. Back in the throne hall, a guard rushed in and knelt before the queen. His voice trembled as he delivered the report. A human ship had entered their space, carrying an unidentified life signature. It was requesting an audience with the queen alone. Queen Zalara turned slowly from the stars. Her eyes burned with something long-buried emotion. Humans were insignificant in the Empire's history, Weak, short-lived, irrelevant, and yet, something about this moment felt wrong. Dangerous. She gave a single command: bring the human to her. The human ship was escorted through the heart of the Aurelian Empire, surrounded by war vessels that could destroy it in seconds. The human pilot remained calm as the stars shifted outside. His view screen. He had expected this response. Fear was the language of empires, and humans had learned long ago how to walk through it without flinching. He checked the systems one last time and confirmed that the life pod in the cargo hold was still stable. The faint signal inside it was weak but steady. That was enough. Inside the imperial capital, tension spread like a silent storm. Soldiers lined the docking bay, weapons charged, eyes fixed on the arriving ship. Humans were rarely seen here and never welcomed. Stories painted them as fragile creatures driven by chaos. Yet this one had crossed forbidden space alone and now stood at the gates of the most powerful empire in the region. That alone made him dangerous. The ship landed. With a low hum, the hatch opened slowly and the human stepped forward. He was tall by human standards, dressed in worn exploration armor marked by old burns and repairs. His face showed signs of long travel, but his eyes were sharp, focused, and unafraid. He did not raise his hands or bow. He simply waited. Guards surrounded him, but hesitated. Something about his stillness unsettled them. He was taken through vast corridors of crystal and metal, deeper into the palace. Every step echoed against walls older than human history. He noticed the symbols of mourning hanging from the structure's dark banners, silent halls, a civilization in grief. He did not need translation software to understand loss. It was universal. As he walked, the human remembered the moment everything had changed. Years ago, while charting unstable space routes, his sensors had detected a weak signal, almost nothing, lost among radiation storms and broken debris. Any sane pilot would have ignored it, but humans were not known for sanity. When curiosity and compassion collided, he had followed the signal into a graveyard of wreckage, and there he found the pod. Inside was an alien child, barely alive, power systems failing, life signs fading. He did not know who she was, only that she was alive. That was enough. He brought her aboard and spent months keeping the pod running, using parts stripped from his own ship. He sent messages into the void, but received no response. Space did not answer prayers. Over time he learned the truth from fragmented data. The child was royalty. Her death had been declared. Her empire had moved on, but the human did not. He had watched over the pod during long silent jumps. Through battles, through hunger, through isolation, he made a promise to someone who could not hear him. He would take her home. Now that promise had brought him here. The doors of the throne hall opened, and the human was led inside. The space was massive, heavy with silence at the far end. Queen Zalara sat upon her throne, eyes fixed on the small figure before her. Guards lined the walls, ready to strike. The human felt the weight of her presence, but did not look away. Belonged to the queen. He said the galaxy had been wrong. He said death had been assumed too soon. The court reacted with anger and disbelief. Some called him a liar, others demanded his execution. To claim such a thing was cruelty. The queen raised her hand and the hall fell silent. She descended from the throne, her gaze locked on the human. She asked one question only: where is she? The human did not answer with words. He activated the remote control in his hand. Far below the palace, in a secured chamber, the pod powered on for the first time in years. A soft pulse echoed through the systems. A life sign flared brighter than before. Across the palace, sensors reacted. Scientists froze. Guards stepped back. Something impossible was happening. The queen felt it before the confirmation reached her. A presence she had buried deep within her soul stirred. Hope tried to rise, and she crushed it instantly. Hope had betrayed her once already. She looked at the human with cold fury and quiet fear. If he was lying, she would end him. If he was telling the truth, the galaxy would never be the same. She ordered the pod brought before her, alive or not. The human closed his eyes briefly. He had done his part. Whatever happened next was no longer in his hands. Far beyond the palace, unseen forces began to move. and the stars watched once more as destiny tightened its grip. The life pod was carried into the throne hall under the watch of armed guards and silent machines. Its surface was scarred and patched with unfamiliar materials, clearly not of Aurelian design. The hum it produced was weak but steady, like a quiet heartbeat echoing through the vast chamber. Every eye followed it as it was placed at the center of the floor before Queen Zalara. The human stood nearby, surrounded but untouched, waiting without fear. The queen stared at the pod, her mind rejected. What her senses hinted at this shape, this energy signature, it was too familiar and yet too impossible. Years of grief hardened her heart against hope. She had buried her daughter with ritual and memory. She had reshaped her empire around that loss. To undo it now felt dangerous, even cruel. She signaled for the chamber to be sealed. No voice carried beyond these walls. The scientists were summoned, trembling as they approached the pod. Their instruments activated, scanning deeper than standard protocol. The silence stretched. Each second felt heavier than the last. Then a single reading appeared on the central display, Aurelian genetic code. Royal lineage confirmed. The air in the hall shifted as disbelief turned into shock. A murmur spread through the court. Some stepped back, others leaned forward as if drawn by gravity. The queen did not move, her breathing slowed. Her eyes never left the pod. The past crashed against the present, and for a moment she stood between two realities, one shaped by grief, the other by a fragile, impossible truth. The pod began to open slowly. Lights flickered as ancient systems struggled to awaken. A soft mist escaped into the hall, carrying the scent of preserved life. The form inside stirred, small movements at first, then a deeper breath. Princess Lyra lived. Queen Zalara felt something fracture inside her. Control slipped. Grief surged, and hope followed close behind, threatening to overwhelm her. She took one step forward, then stopped. Fear froze her in place. What if this was an illusion? What if fate was mocking her one final time? The princess opened her eyes. They were unfocused, confused. Her gaze drifted across the unfamiliar ceiling, the towering figures, the weapons. Then she saw the queen. Her expression changed, not with recognition, but with fear. She tried to pull back, but her body was weak. The queen felt the blow like a blade. Her daughter did not know her. Before she could move, guards reacted instinctively, stepping forward, weapons raised. The human raised his voice for the first time, ordering them to stop. His tone carried authority, earned, not given. He explained that the princess had survived in deep stasis, her memory damaged by time, isolation, and trauma. She was alive, but fragile. The queen gestured, and the guards froze. She approached slowly, lowering herself to her knees before the pod, an act no ruler had witnessed in centuries. She spoke her daughter's name softly. The sound echoed with history, power, and love. But the princess only stared, unsure, uncertain, afraid. Anger erupted among the council. Some accused the human of manipulation. Others claimed the princess was no longer fit to exist, that her return threatened stability. One voice called for immediate termination to preserve order. The words had barely left his mouth before the queen rose. Her presence filled the hall like a storm. She declared that any who spoke of her daughter's death again would answer to her personally. The empire would not erase this miracle because it was inconvenient. The queen then turned to the human and studied him, not as a prisoner, but as a force. She demanded to know why he had done this. Humans gained nothing from Aurelian favor. He could have sold the pod, vanished into space, claimed no responsibility. The human answered simply. He said humans do not abandon the living. He said some promises matter more than survival. That answer unsettled the court more than any weapon. The princess suddenly cried out, a sharp sound of pain and confusion. Alarms flared as her vitals spiked. The scientists rushed forward, working desperately. The queen stood helpless, watching her daughter slip toward danger once more. The human moved without hesitation, guiding them, adjusting unfamiliar systems with practiced hands. His knowledge saved her. When the crisis passed, the hall remained silent again. Only now the silence was different, charged, heavy, filled with consequence. The queen looked at her daughter sleeping. Once more then, at the human standing exhausted yet steady, she understood then that this was not the end of grief, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. Truth outside the sealed hall, unseen enemies within the empire took note. Plans began to form. Whispers moved through shadowed corridors. The return of the princess threatened power, ancient secrets, and fragile peace, and humanity had placed itself at the center of it all. But Throne Hall did not return to normal after the revelation. It remained sealed, guarded, intense, as if the walls themselves sensed the danger that had entered the empire. Princess Lyra was moved to a protected healing chamber deep within the palace where only the queen and a handful of trusted scientists were allowed to enter. Officially, the empire announced nothing. Unofficially, whispers spread faster than light. Power always attracts fear, and fear breeds enemies. Within the upper ranks of the Aurelian Empire, several leaders gathered in secret chambers far from the queen's sight. They had built their influence during the years of mourning, shaping policy, controlling fleets, and silencing opposition. The return of the princess threatened everything. They spoke of stability, tradition, and order, but beneath their words lay one truth. If Lyra lived, their power would fade. They questioned the legitimacy of her survival. They called her damaged, broken, no longer fit to rule. Some suggested the human had altered her. Others argued that a symbol once lost could not be returned without chaos. Their voices grew sharper as fear turned into resolve. A decision was made. The human was the weakness. Remove him, and the miracle could be undone. Unaware of the plot, the human remained near the healing chamber, sleeping in short cycles, always alert. He trusted no empire, no matter how powerful. He had seen what fear did to advanced civilizations. His presence irritated the guards, yet none challenged him. The queen had given direct orders. He was not to be harmed. Queen Zalara watched her daughter through the transparent barrier. Lyra slept connected to glowing conduits, her breathing slow but steady. The queen felt a quiet terror. She had never known before the fear of losing something. Twice was worse than grief itself. She placed her hand against the barrier and made a silent vow. Nothing would take her daughter again. Elsewhere, the plot moved forward. A false alert was triggered within the palace systems. A containment failure. Security units were redirected away from the healing wing. At the same time, a strike team moved through service corridors, weapons masked and unregistered. Their orders were clear. End the human, then the princess. The human sensed something was wrong. Long before the alarms reached him, the palace had changed its rhythm. The air felt tighter, quieter. He moved toward the chamber, just as the lights dimmed. A shadow shifted at the edge of the corridor, and instinct took over. He dove aside as energy. Fire scorched the wall where he had stood. The attack was swift, silent, and deadly. The strike team advanced, expecting an easy kill. Instead, they faced a human who had survived alone in hostile space for years. He used the environment door's gravity, shifts, and timing, turning the corridor into a trap. One attacker fell, then another. Their surprise was their greatest weakness. Still, they pressed forward, driven by fear of what failure would mean. Inside the healing chamber, the scientists panicked. As the power fluctuated, Princess Lyra stirred, her vitals spiking again. The queen felt the disturbance and turned, rage burning through her restraint. She summoned her personal guard and moved toward the chamber without hesitation. The human reached the entrance as the last attacker fell. He was injured, blood dark against his armor, but standing, he sealed the chamber and reinforced the locks, manually cutting off external access. He turned just as the queen arrived, flanked by guards, weapons aimed but held. For a moment no one spoke. Then the human explained quickly, clearly. Enemies within the empire sought to erase the truth. He had stopped them, but others would follow. The Palo, the Fae, enemies within the empire, sought to erase the truth. He had stopped them, but others would follow. Queen looked at the fallen attackers, their armor stripped of insignia, and understood the depth of betrayal. Her empire had rotted from within. She ordered the immediate arrest of several council members, based on intelligence she had long suspected, but never confirmed. Chaos erupted across the capital as loyal Forces clashed with conspirators. The illusion of unity shattered, revealing a struggle for the Empire's soul. During the conflict, Princess Lyra awakened again. This time her eyes were clearer. She looked at the Queen not with fear but confusion and pain. She spoke a single word, "Mother." The Queen fell to her knees, tears she had forbidden herself to shed finally escaping. In that moment, power, politics, and war faded. There was only a mother and a daughter finding each other again. But the galaxy would not allow peace so easily. As fighting raged through the palace, the human stood guard between Lyra and the world. He knew this was far from over. Empires do not forgive disruption, and humanity had become the spark in the shadows beyond the capital. External forces watched closely. The return of the princess had sent ripples far beyond Aurelian borders. New players prepared to move. The war for truth had only begun. The palace trembled as internal conflict spread through its massive structure. Energy surges flickered across the walls, and distant echoes of combat rolled through the corridors. Yet within the healing chamber, time seemed to slow. Princess Lyra lay awake now, her eyes following every movement. The Queen remained close, refusing to leave her side, even as reports of betrayal and fighting flooded her mind. For the first time in her reign, she placed family above empire. The human stood near the entrance, wounded but steady. He had sealed the chamber using methods unfamiliar to Aurelian technology, combining human improvisation with captured systems. The guards watched him with unease. They had seen warriors of many species, but none like this one, being standing between chaos and a fragile life, not because of duty or command, but because he had chosen to. As rebel forces pushed closer, the Queen faced a decision. She could retreat with her daughter and abandon the capital, or stand and crush the uprising, risking everything. She turned to the human and asked a question few rulers would ever ask an outsider. "What would you do?" The human answered without hesitation. He said, "Humans endure. They adapt. They protect what matters, even when the cost is high." He suggested holding the chamber, turning it into a symbol, not a fortress. If the princess lived openly, the lie would collapse. Fear thrived in darkness, not in truth. The Queen listened carefully. She had ruled through strength and control, but humanity offered something different, resolve rooted in purpose. She issued new orders. Loyal forces were to regroup around the healing wind, broadcasting the princess alive to every channel within the empire. Let the galaxy see what fear had tried to erase. The message spread faster than weapons ever could. Images of Princess Lyra breathing, speaking, reaching for her mother ignited shock across the empire. Soldiers hesitated, rebel units fractured, some surrendered, others fought harder, driven by desperation. The rebels launched a final assault. A massive breach tore open a nearby corridor. The human moved first, dragging heavy debris into position, using improvised charges and magnetic locks. He directed guards twice his size. With calm authority, they followed without question. When the attackers arrived, they met a defense unlike anything in Aurelian doctrine. Human tactics were unpredictable, using misdirection, timing, and sacrifice. The human placed himself where the attack was strongest, drawing fire away from the chamber. He was struck again and again, but did not fall. Each time he rose, fueled by something the attackers could not understand. Purpose. Princess Lyra watched from her bed, fear and awe mixing within her. She did not fully remember her past, but she understood this moment. Someone she had never met was fighting for her without expectation. She reached out instinctively and touched the barrier. Her voice carried through the chamber, asking why he was doing this. The human answered simply, "Some lives matter even if the universe says otherwise." That answer changed something inside her. The final rebel leader breached the corridor, weapon raised, screaming that the princess must die for order to survive. The Queen stepped forward, fury blazing, ready to end him. But the human reached the attacker first, disarming him with brutal efficiency. He did not kill, he restrained. When asked why he spared the enemy, the human said humanity had learned that survival without morality was failure. Silence followed. Then surrender. With the rebellion broken, the empire began to stabilize. Loyal forces secured the capital. Arrests followed, trials would come later. For now the threat was ended. The Queen approached the human as medics worked to treat his wounds. She studied him not as a fragile being, but as something far more dangerous, a species that refused to give up on the living. She bowed to him before her court. The gesture stunned everyone. A queen acknowledging a human as an equal, if not more. The Queen declared that humanity had shown strength beyond weapons or fleets. It had shown conviction. Princess Lyra called out again, this time more clearly. The Queen turned and held her hand. Lyra looked between them and understood that her survival was not chance, it was choice. The Empire had witnessed something that could not be undone. Humans were no longer insignificant. They were protectors, promise keepers, disruptors of fate far. Beyond the palace systems, alien observers recorded every moment. Calculations changed, alliances were reconsidered. Humanity had revealed its true strength, and the galaxy was paying attention. In the days that followed the fall of the rebellion, the Aurelian Empire moved carefully, as if afraid that sudden motion might shatter what remained of its stability. The capital bore scars of conflict, yet something new flowed beneath the damage. A sense of awakening. Princess Lyra continued to recover. Her strength under constant watch, her movements were slow, but her eyes were sharp and thoughtful, absorbing the world that had changed without her. The Queen spent long hours at her daughter's side, listening more than speaking. She had ruled an empire for decades, but now she learned patience in its purest form. Lyra's memory returned not as a single flood, but as fragments. Emotion, sounds, flashes of fear and light. The Queen did not push. She waited one cycle while the palace slept. Lyra finally spoke of what she remembered. Her voice was unsteady but determined. She described the mission beyond known space, the strange signals that drew her ship off course, and the ambush that followed. She spoke of a hidden alliance within the Empire that had betrayed her location to external forces, seeking to destabilize Aurelian rule. Her death had been planned, not accidental. Truth struck harder than any rebellion. The Queen felt a cold clarity settle within her grief. Her empire had not only failed her daughter, it had attempted to erase her. The loss she had mourned was built on lies, protected by power and fear. She realized then that restoring Lyra meant more than keeping her alive. It meant reshaping everything that had allowed such betrayal to exist. As Lyra continued, she spoke of being forced into an escape pod set adrift after her ship was destroyed. She remembered darkness, silence, and the slow fading of time until nothing remained. Then the human, a shape, a voice, a warmth that refused to let her disappear. Though she could not recall his face clearly, she remembered the feeling: safety. The human stood nearby, listening without interruption. He felt no pride, only a quiet weight, knowing that a life he had protected now carried the burden of truth. The Queen turned to him and asked what had driven him to keep the pod alive for so long when logic demanded. He abandoned. I'd answered that humans had a habit of believing tomorrow mattered even when today offered no reason. That answer stayed with Lyra. The Queen convened a private council, not of politicians, but of witnesses. Scientists, soldiers, and advisors who had seen the truth with their own eyes. Lyra addressed them herself, speaking of betrayal and survival. Her presence was still fragile, but her words carried strength. The council listened, knowing history was being rewritten. The Queen declared an end to the old power structures that had hidden corruption under tradition. Several high-ranking houses were stripped of authority. Investigations spread across the Empire, uncovering networks of deception. The Empire would not heal quickly, but it would heal honestly. Yet peace did not follow truth immediately. News of Lyra's survival and the internal purge spread beyond Aurelian borders. Other empires reacted with fear and suspicion. Some questioned whether Lyra was real. Others feared what a human-protected royal could mean for galactic balance. Intelligence fleets moved quietly toward Aurelian space. Lyra sensed the tension and asked the Queen what would happen next. The Queen answered without hesitation. War would come, or alliance, or both, depending on choices made by others. Lyra then asked about humanity. The Queen paused. She admitted that She had once seen humans as insignificant. Now she saw them as unpredictable and therefore powerful, not because of numbers or technology, but because they refused to accept endings. Lyra asked to speak to the human alone in a quiet chamber. She thanked him not as royalty, but as someone who had been lost. She told him that her survival had meaning because he had given it one. The human listened, uncomfortable with gratitude. He said he had only done what he hoped someone would do for him. Lyra smiled faintly and said that was exactly what frightened the galaxy. As the meeting ended, a warning arrived from the outer systems. Multiple fleets were approaching under the claim of observation, but their formations told a different story. Preparation. The Queen looked to the stars, knowing the next challenge would test everything. The Empire had truth, but truth demanded defense. She turned to the human and offered him a place not as a guest or subject, but as an ally. Humanity would stand beside the Aurelian Empire, not beneath it. The human accepted not for power or reward, but because promises once made did not end with survival beyond. The capital, the galaxy shifted, lines were redrawn, and history bent under the weight of a single choice made long ago in deep space. Death had been defeated. The arrival of foreign fleets at the edge of Aurelian space marked the moment when the galaxy was forced to face a new reality. Warships from rival empires formed distant lines, their commanders watching and calculating. None crossed the border. Yet their hesitation spoke louder than any threat. They had seen the broadcasts. They knew the princess lived, and they knew a human stood at the center of her return. Queen Zalara chose not to hide or prepare in silence. Instead, she ordered a full transmission sent across open channels, no encryption, no barriers. The message carried images of Princess Lyra standing beside her mother, supported but unbroken. It carried the truth of betrayal and survival, and it carried a clear warning: the Aurelian Empire would not erase its own future again. The response was immediate. Some fleets withdrew, unwilling to challenge a united empire. Others held position, uncertain. Fear had replaced confidence. A single human had disrupted centuries of balance, and no one knew how to counter that. Princess Lyra stepped forward during the transmission and spoke not as a victim, but as a survivor. She spoke of darkness and rescue, of silence broken by compassion. She named the human not as a savior, but as a reminder that life could not be reduced to strategy. Her words carried beyond politics. They reached something older within every species. The galaxy listened behind the scenes. The queen finalized her decision. She granted the human a title unknown in Aurelian history: guardian of the returned, a symbol of trust, not dominance. The act sent shockwaves through diplomatic networks. Humanity was no longer an observer. It was a participant. The human accepted with humility. He did not seek honor, yet he understood its weight. This was not about him alone. It was about what his species represented. The idea that even in a universe ruled by power, someone would choose to protect the weak simply because they existed. Over time, the foreign fleets departed, one by one. They left, unwilling to be the first to test a new alliance forged by truth and resolve. The immediate threat faded, but its lesson remained. Humanity had become a factor no empire could ignore. Within the capital, healing began. Princess Lyra regained strength, her memories returning slowly. She learned of the empire that had changed in her absence, one that questioned tradition and confronted corruption. She also learned of the human world, scattered and resilient, each shaped by survival. She found common ground easily. Humans like Aurelians had endured loss and chosen to continue. The queen watched her daughter and felt something she had not allowed herself in years. Pride not in power, but in transformation. She addressed the empire, declaring a new era, one built on transparency and courage. She acknowledged the debt owed to humanity, openly stating that the empire stood because a human refused to walk away. The final ceremony took place beneath the open stars. The human prepared to depart, his mission complete. He expected a quiet farewell. Instead, he found the queen, the princess, and representatives of the empire waiting. The queen thanked him not as a ruler, but as a mother. The princess embraced him, her memory now strong enough to understand the bond they shared. She told him that the galaxy would remember what he had done. He replied that memory mattered less than choice. Everyday beings decided who they were by what they protected. As his ship lifted from the capital, the sky filled with light. The Empire watched in silence, understanding that something fundamental had shifted. Humanity had proven itself not through conquest, but through commitment. Far beyond the capital worlds whispered the story. The queen who mourned, the daughter who returned, the human who refused to accept death as final. And so the galaxy learned a truth it would never forget. Never underestimate humans, because when the universe turns away, they remain.